What happens when one night's harmless dancing becomes the reason your husband delivers divorce papers to your door? Can you really claim honesty when your story turns friends and family against the person you promised to love? This is the story of how my attempt to justify a mistake led to losing everything. By the book. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The bass thrummed through the crowded downtown bar as I adjusted my black dress for the third time. The company holiday party was in full swing, and I felt more alive than I had in months. Nathaniel hadn't even looked up from his laptop when I'd announced I was leaving. "Have fun," he'd muttered, fingers still clicking away at some code that apparently mattered more than his wife getting dressed up for the first time in ages. "Evadne, you look absolutely stunning." Tristan Hayes appeared at my elbow with 2 drinks, his smile bright and predatory. As our company's top sales rep, Tristan had that practiced charm that made clients sign contracts and women forget they were married. "Thanks," I said, accepting the cocktail. The vodka burned pleasantly, and I realized how long it had been since I'd felt this kind of attention. When was the last time Nathaniel had complimented my appearance? When had he last looked at me like I was desirable, instead of just another piece of furniture in his perfectly organized life? "Your husband couldn't make it?" Tristan asked, moving closer as the music swelled. "He's working. Again." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Some urgent project that apparently can't wait until Monday. Tristan's hand touched my lower back, just barely, as he guided me toward the dance floor. "His loss is my gain, then." I should have stepped away. I should have made an excuse and gone home to my 8-year-old daughter Olivia and my emotionally distant husband. Instead, I let Tristan lead me into the crowd of swaying bodies, let him pull me close as the lights dimmed and the alcohol loosened my inhibitions. "You're an amazing dancer," he whispered in my ear, his breath hot against my neck. His hands were on my hips now, pulling me against him as we moved to the rhythm. I could feel the heat of his body, smell his expensive cologne mixed with whiskey. The rational part of my brain, the part that remembered I was Evadne March, married for 9 years, mother to a sweet little girl, screamed warnings. But that voice was drowned out by the music, the alcohol, and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted. When had Nathaniel last held me like this? When had he last looked at me with hunger in his eyes? "This is just dancing," I told myself as Tristan's hands roamed lower, as other couples pressed around us in the dim lighting. "It's harmless fun. Everyone dances at parties." But even as I rationalized, I knew I was crossing lines. When Tristan spun me around and pulled me back against his chest, when his lips brushed my shoulder, when I ground against him in ways that had nothing to do with innocent dancing, I knew this was wrong. Yet I couldn't stop. For the first time in months, I felt alive, desirable, worth someone's attention. "We should get some air," Tristan suggested, his voice husky with suggestion. That's when the spell broke. Through the haze of alcohol and music, I saw Jennifer from accounting, holding up her phone, clearly recording. The flash of her camera cut through my euphoria like ice water. I need to go home," I stammered, pushing away from Tristan so quickly I nearly stumbled. "Evadne, wait." But I was already pushing through the crowd, grabbing my purse, rushing toward the exit. My phone buzzed with notifications as I waited for my Uber, but I was too afraid to look. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and regret, my reflection in the window, showing smeared makeup, and the face of a woman who had just made a terrible mistake. Nathaniel was still at his computer when I crept inside, Olivia long since asleep. He glanced up briefly, took in my disheveled appearance, and simply nodded before returning to his screen. "How was the party?" he asked without looking up. "Fine," I lied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just fine." I lay awake all night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment on that dance floor. By morning, I had convinced myself it wasn't that bad. It was just dancing. People were overreacting. I had stopped before anything really happened, hadn't I? That showed my loyalty, my commitment to my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, a video file. My stomach dropped as I opened it, seeing myself and Tristan in a compromising embrace. His hands clearly visible on my body, my face showing obvious enjoyment. I had to get ahead of this. I had to control the narrative before it spiraled out of control. The next morning, I found Nathaniel in the kitchen, making coffee with his usual methodical precision. Everything about my husband was measured, controlled, from the way he folded his newspapers to how he organized his desk drawers. It used to comfort me. Now it felt suffocating. "Nathaniel, we need to talk." He looked up from his coffee maker, those pale blue eyes giving nothing away. "About what?" "About last night, about the party." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had decided was the right approach. Honesty, complete transparency. It would show him that I was trustworthy, that I had nothing to hide. "Something happened, and I want you to hear it from me first." His hand stilled on his coffee mug. "Go on." "I danced with Tristan Hayes from work. It got a little inappropriate. But I stopped it, Nathaniel. I left when I realized it was going too far. I chose our marriage. I chose you." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. "Inappropriate how?" His voice was perfectly level. We were dancing close, too close. His hands wandered, but nothing really happened, Nathaniel. I came home to you. I'm telling you because I believe in honesty in our marriage. He nodded slowly, as if processing data. "I see. Thank you for telling me." That was it. No anger, no hurt, no dramatic confrontation. I had been prepared for a fight, for tears, for him to beg me to explain why I would do such a thing. Instead, he simply returned to his coffee as if I had told him the weather forecast. "That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say, Evadne?" His calmness unnerved me more than screaming would have. "I don't know. Something, anything. I just confessed that another man touched me, and you're acting like I told you I bought groceries. You said nothing really happened. You said you chose our marriage. What more is there to discuss?" But there was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that made my skin crawl. This wasn't forgiveness. This was something else entirely. Later that evening, we had dinner plans with my sister, Sophie, and her husband, Colin, along with Nathaniel's mother, Martha. I had been dreading it all day, worried that somehow they would know, that my guilt would be written across my face. Instead, I found myself doing something I hadn't planned. As we sat around the table at Romano's, our usual upscale restaurant, I found myself bringing up the party again. "You know," I said, my voice carrying across the table, "I had an interesting experience last night at the company party." Sophie looked up from her pasta, always eager for gossip. "Oh, do tell." I glanced at Nathaniel, who was cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Well, I ended up dancing with a colleague, Tristan Hayes, and things got a little heated." Martha's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Colin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I couldn't stop myself. The words kept coming, as if I needed witnesses to my honesty, proof of my integrity. His hands were all over me, I continued, watching their faces. We were grinding against each other like teenagers. It was completely inappropriate for a married woman. "Evadne," Sophie said quietly, her eyes darting to Olivia, who was picking at her chicken fingers with obvious discomfort. "But here's the thing," I pressed on, my voice getting stronger. "I stopped it. When I realized how far it had gone, I left. I came home to my husband and my daughter because that's what matters. That's what loyalty looks like." The table fell silent. Martha set down her fork entirely, her lips pressed into a thin line. Colin was staring at his plate, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Even Sophie looked uncomfortable now. I told Nathaniel everything this morning, I continued, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but his fingers were cold and unresponsive. Because that's what marriage is about: honesty, trust, working through mistakes together. Evadne, Martha said finally, her voice sharp with disapproval. Perhaps this isn't appropriate dinner conversation. Why not? I'm not ashamed of being honest. I made a mistake, but I corrected it. I chose my family. Isn't that what matters? I looked around the table, expecting support, understanding, maybe even admiration for my integrity. Instead, I saw discomfort, embarrassment, and something that looked suspiciously like pity. Nathaniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. He pulled out his wallet, placed several bills on the table, and looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "Dinner's on me," he said quietly. "I need some air." And then he walked away, leaving me sitting there with our family, my confession hanging in the air like a bad smell. "Well," Sophie said after a long moment, "that was something." Martha gathered her purse, her movements sharp with disapproval. "I think I'll check on Nathaniel," she said, not looking at me. "Colin, would you mind driving Sophie and Olivia home?" As they filed out of the restaurant, I sat alone at the table, surrounded by half-eaten meals and the wreckage of what I had thought would be a moment of triumph. My honesty, my integrity, my choice to do the right thing, none of it had landed the way I expected. But that was their problem, wasn't it? They just didn't understand what real honesty looked like. The next few days passed in a strange, tense quiet. Nathaniel went about his routines, work, dinner, helping Olivia with homework, with the same methodical precision as always, but something fundamental had shifted. He spoke to me only when necessary, his responses polite but distant. At work, I could feel the whispers following me down the hallways. Jennifer from accounting gave me knowing looks. The break room conversation stopped when I entered. Even my boss, David Richardson, seemed to be watching me more carefully. "Evadne, could I see you in my office?" David asked on Wednesday afternoon. I followed him into his glass-walled office, my heart hammering. David was a fair man, but he took workplace professionalism seriously. "I've been hearing some concerning rumors about the holiday party," he began, settling behind his desk. "Nothing official, you understand, but I wanted to check in with you." "What kind of rumors?" I asked, though I already knew. "About inappropriate behavior with a colleague. Specifically, Tristan Hayes." I felt my face flush. "David, I didn't do anything wrong. We danced at a party, that's all. People are making it sound like something it wasn't." "I see." He made a note on his pad. "And you're comfortable with how you conducted yourself that evening?" "Absolutely. Look, I may have had a few drinks, and maybe the dancing was a little enthusiastic, but I didn't cross any real lines. I went home to my husband. I told him everything because I believe in honesty." David nodded slowly. "I appreciate your transparency, Evadne. Just be aware that workplace relationships can be complicated, and we need to maintain professional boundaries." "Of course, but there is no workplace relationship. It was just dancing." As I left his office, I caught sight of Tristan by the water cooler. Our eyes met briefly, and he looked away quickly, suddenly very interested in his phone. The coward couldn't even acknowledge what had happened between us. That evening, I tried to talk to Nathaniel again. I found him in his home office, organizing files with his usual obsessive attention to detail. "Nathaniel, this silent treatment has to stop. We need to talk about what's happening between us." He looked up from his papers. "What would you like to talk about?" "About how you're punishing me for being honest. About how you're making me feel like a criminal for telling you the truth." "I'm not punishing you, Evadne. I'm processing." "Processing what? I told you nothing really happened. I told you I chose our marriage. What more do you want from me? He set down his pen and looked at me directly. I want to understand why you thought it was appropriate to share the details of your dancing with my mother and our friends at dinner. Because I'm not ashamed of being honest, because I wanted them to know that I did the right thing in the end. The right thing would have been not grinding against another man in the first place. His words hit like a slap. So now you're judging me. I thought you said we were past this. I said I understood what you told me. That doesn't mean I'm past it. I stared at him, this man I'd been married to for 9 years, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Where was the understanding husband? Where was the forgiveness, the working together to rebuild trust? You know what your problem is, Nathaniel? You're emotionally unavailable. You've been neglecting me for months, buried in your work, treating me like I'm invisible. And when I finally get some attention, some appreciation from someone else, you act like I'm the villain. Something flickered in his eyes. I see. Do you? Do you really? Because from where I'm sitting, this whole situation is as much your fault as mine. If you had been present in our marriage, if you had made me feel wanted and appreciated, none of this would have happened. He nodded slowly, as if considering my words. You're right, I should have been more attentive. His agreement surprised me. I had expected another fight, but here he was, acknowledging his role in pushing me toward another man's arms. I'm glad you can see that, I said, feeling vindicated. So, where do we go from here? I'm still processing, he said, returning to his papers. Give me some time. Over the next few days, I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother. I cooked Nathaniel's favorite meals, helped Olivia with her school project, kept the house spotless. I was proving that I was committed, that I deserved forgiveness, that I was worth fighting for. But Nathaniel remained distant, polite but cold, and I began to notice things. He changed the password on his laptop. He started locking his desk drawer. He took phone calls in the garage, speaking in low voices I couldn't quite hear. What are you hiding? I asked him one evening after he finished another mysterious phone call. I'm not hiding anything, Evadne. Then who are you talking to? A colleague, about work. But something in his tone told me he was lying. My husband, who prided himself on honesty and transparency, was keeping secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophie called that weekend, her voice careful and measured. How are things going with Nathaniel? He's being stubborn, punishing me for being honest, but I think he's starting to come around. Evadne, Sophie paused. Maybe you should consider that he might need more time to process this. What you described at dinner was pretty intense. Whose side are you on here? I'm on your side. I'm always on your side. I just think maybe you could give him some space to work through his feelings. But I didn't want to give him space. I wanted him to forgive me, to acknowledge his role in pushing me away, to fight for our marriage. Instead, he was pulling further away, building walls I couldn't scale. Late that night, I found him in the kitchen, printing documents at our shared computer station. When he saw me, he quickly closed the laptop. What are you printing at midnight? Just some work documents. But as he gathered the papers, I caught a glimpse of letterhead that definitely wasn't from his IT company. Legal letterhead. Nathaniel, what's going on? Nothing you need to worry about right now. But I was worried. Very worried. Because for the first time since this whole mess started, I was beginning to realize that my husband's calm, methodical response might not be forgiveness at all. It might be something far more dangerous. I woke up the next morning to find Nathaniel's side of the bed cold and empty. This was becoming a pattern. He was rising earlier, staying up later, finding excuses to be anywhere but in the same room as me. When I went downstairs, I found him at the kitchen table with his laptop, a cup of coffee, and a yellow legal pad covered in his precise handwriting. Morning, I said, trying to keep my voice light. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. He didn't look up from whatever he was typing. I moved closer, trying to see the screen, but he angled it away from me. What are you working on? Just organizing some things. What kind of things? Finally, he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. It was the look he got when he was solving a particularly complex problem at work. Focused, analytical, completely detached. Household things, financial things, making sure everything is properly documented. Why do you need to document household finances? It's always good to have records, Evadne. You never know when you might need them. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. I tried to laugh it off. You make it sound like you're preparing for war. Just being thorough. Over the next few days, Nathaniel's behavior became increasingly methodical and secretive. I noticed he had started photographing things, receipts, documents, even text messages on his phone. When I asked about it, he gave me the same neutral response. Just keeping records. He changed the passwords on our joint bank accounts, claiming it was for security purposes. He started carrying a small notebook, jotting down notes at odd moments. When Olivia spilled juice on the kitchen table, he noted the date and time. When I came home late from work, he wrote that down too. "This is getting ridiculous," I told him one evening. "You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal." "I'm just being organized." "No, you're being paranoid and controlling. This isn't healthy, Nathaniel." He looked up from his notebook. "What would be healthy in your opinion?" "Talking, communicating, working through this together instead of whatever this is." I gestured at his papers, his notes, his obsessive documentation of our daily life. "I thought we were working through it." "How?" "By treating me like I'm under surveillance, by changing passwords and taking secret phone calls and acting like I'm the enemy." "Are you the enemy, Evadne?" The question caught me off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Are you working with me or against me? With you. I've been trying to work with you this whole time. I told you the truth about what happened. I've been trying to make this right. He nodded and made another note in his book. The casual way he did it made me want to scream. "What did you just write?" "That you said you've been trying to make this right." "Why are you writing that down?" "For my records." I snatched the notebook from his hands before he could stop me. Page after page of entries, all in his neat handwriting. 12:15, E came home 45 minutes late, claimed traffic. 12:16, E received text from unknown number, deleted immediately. 12:17, E asked about changing locks, claimed for security. 12:18, E mentioned Tristan Hayes favorably in casual conversation. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, flipping through pages of documented conversations, times, dates, observations. "I told you." "Records." "Records for what? Are you building some kind of case against me?" "Should I be?" I threw the notebook back at him. "This is insane, Nathaniel. You're acting like a crazy person." "I'm acting like someone who wants to understand what's really happening in his marriage." "What's happening is that you're driving me away with this paranoid behavior." He picked up the notebook and made another entry. I could see him writing the date and time, probably noting that I had called him paranoid and crazy. That night, I called Sophie in tears. "I think my marriage is falling apart." "What's happening?" "Nathaniel is completely obsessed with documenting everything I do. He's changed all our passwords. He's taking secret phone calls. He's writing down everything I say like he's building some kind of file against me." "That does sound excessive," Sophie agreed. "Maybe he's just processing his hurt in an unhealthy way. Or maybe he's planning something." "Sophie, I found a calendar entry on his phone for something called initial consultation at a law office." The silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. "Sophie?" "Evadne, you need to be very careful right now." "Careful of what?" "If Nathaniel is talking to lawyers, if he's documenting everything you do and say." "Honey, I think he might be preparing for divorce." The word hit me like a physical blow. Divorce. I had never seriously considered that possibility. We had problems, sure, but we were working through them. I had been honest with him. I had chosen our marriage over Tristan. I was fighting for us. He wouldn't do that, I said, but even as I spoke, I remembered his cold eyes, his methodical note-taking, his complete emotional withdrawal. Just be careful what you say and do right now, Sophie advised. If he is building a case, you don't want to give him ammunition. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room, thinking about the man I had married 9 years ago. Nathaniel had always been methodical, but this was different. This was strategic. This was someone preparing for battle. But if he wanted a fight, he was going to get one. I wasn't going to let him destroy our family over one night of harmless dancing. I wasn't going to let him paint me as the villain when he was the one who had driven me to seek attention elsewhere. I had been honest. I had been loyal. I had chosen our marriage. And I would fight to save it whether he wanted me to or not. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen again, but this time he was on the phone. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call. "Who is that?" "Work. At 7 in the morning. Early meeting." But I had heard enough of the conversation to know it wasn't about work. I had heard the words custody and documentation and timeline. My husband wasn't just keeping records, he was preparing for war. The realization that Nathaniel might be planning divorce hit me like a freight train, but instead of backing down, I decided to go on the offensive. If he was building a case against me, I would build one against him. If he wanted to play games with documentation and evidence, I could play that game too. I started by reaching out to Tristan. We needed to get our stories straight, to make sure that if anyone asked, we presented a united front about what had really happened at the party. "Can we meet for coffee?" I texted him. "We need to talk about the party situation." His response came an hour later. "I don't think that's a good idea. It's important. People are making this into something it wasn't. Maybe we should just let it blow over." But I couldn't let it blow over. Not when my marriage was on the line. I cornered him in the break room the next day, making sure we were alone. "Tristan, we need to discuss what happened at the party." He looked uncomfortable, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Evadne, I think we should just forget about it." "I can't forget about it. My husband is acting like I committed adultery when all we did was dance. Look, maybe the dancing got a little intense, but nothing really happened, right? We didn't kiss, we didn't go anywhere together. It was just dancing." "Exactly. That's exactly what I need you to remember if anyone asks. It was just dancing between colleagues. Nothing inappropriate happened." But even as I said it, I could see in his eyes that he remembered more than just innocent dancing. He remembered his hands on my body, the way I had pressed against him, the heat between us that had nothing to do with the crowded dance floor. "Sure," he said finally, "just dancing." But his tone was unconvincing, and I realized he was going to be useless if this situation escalated. He was already distancing himself, protecting his own reputation at the expense of mine. At home, things continued to deteriorate. Nathaniel's documentation project had expanded. I found him photographing the contents of my purse when he thought I wasn't looking. He had started asking Olivia casual questions about my schedule, my mood, my phone calls. "Daddy, why are you writing in that book so much?" I heard Olivia ask one evening. "Just keeping track of things, sweetheart. It helps Daddy remember important stuff." "Are you writing about Mommy?" A pause. "Sometimes." "Is Mommy in trouble?" "No, honey. Mommy's not in trouble. Daddy's just trying to understand some grown-up things." But Olivia wasn't stupid. She could feel the tension in the house, see the way her parents barely spoke to each other anymore. She started having nightmares, clinging to me at bedtime, asking questions I couldn't answer. "Are you and Daddy getting divorced?" she asked one night, her 8-year-old eyes wide with worry. "Of course not, baby. Daddy and I are just working through some problems. All married couples have problems sometimes." "But you don't talk to each other anymore." "We talk. Not like you used to. And Daddy's always writing in his book, and you cry when you think I'm not looking. The fact that my daughter could see through our facade so clearly was devastating. But I couldn't tell her the truth, that her father was systematically building a case to destroy our family over one night of dancing. Martha, Nathaniel's mother, called me the following week. Her voice was cold, formal. "Evadne, I think we need to have a conversation." "Of course, Martha, what about?" "About what you're putting my son through." I felt my defenses rise. "What I'm putting him through? Martha, I made one mistake and I was honest about it. I told him everything." "You humiliated him in public. You told a table full of people that another man had his hands all over you, and you acted like it was something to be proud of." "I was proud of being honest. I was proud of choosing my marriage." "You were proud of hurting my son and embarrassing our family." The unfairness of it made me want to scream. Where was Nathaniel when I needed attention? Where was he when I was feeling neglected and ignored? Maybe if he had been a better husband, none of this would have happened. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I see," Martha said finally. "So this is Nathaniel's fault." "I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm saying we both contributed to the problems in our marriage." "And your contribution was grinding against another man at a party." "My contribution was trying to feel valued and appreciated when my own husband couldn't be bothered to look up from his computer." "Goodbye, Evadne." The line went dead, and I realized I had just lost another ally. But what choice did I have? I couldn't let them paint me as the sole villain in this story when Nathaniel bore responsibility too. That weekend, I discovered the folder. Nathaniel had left it on his desk, either by accident or because he wanted me to find it. It was labeled Custody Documentation in his precise handwriting. Inside were printed copies of text messages, including ones between Tristan and me that I didn't even remember sending. Photos from the party that showed us dancing, his hands clearly visible on my body. Screenshots of my social media posts. Bank records showing purchases I had made. A timeline of events starting from the night of the party and extending to the present day. But the worst part was the character assessment section. He had documented every argument we'd had since the party, every time I had been late coming home, every interaction with Olivia that he deemed noteworthy. He had turned our marriage into evidence, our family into a case study. At the bottom of the folder was a business card, Harrison and Associates, Family Law. I confronted him that evening, waving the folder in his face. "What the hell is this?" He looked at the folder calmly, as if he had been expecting this moment. "It's exactly what it looks like. You're planning to divorce me over one night of dancing. I'm planning to protect my daughter from the chaos you've brought into our lives." "Chaos? I told you the truth. I've been trying to fix this." "You've been trying to justify it. There's a difference." "I chose our marriage, Nathaniel. I came home to you. After grinding against another man in front of your co-workers, after letting him touch you in ways that should be reserved for your husband, after humiliating me in front of my mother and our friends. So you're going to destroy our family? You're going to take Olivia away from me?" "I'm going to do what's best for Olivia. And what's best for her is stability, honesty, and a parent who doesn't think marriage vows are suggestions." I stared at this man I had shared a bed with for 9 years and realized I didn't know him at all. The quiet, methodical husband I had taken for granted had been planning this systematically, building his case while I thought we were working through our problems. "You're not going to win this," I told him. "I'm her mother. I'm a good mother." "Are you? Because good mothers don't humiliate their families in public. Good mothers don't blame their husbands for their own poor choices. Good mothers don't teach their daughters that marriage vows are optional. I never broke my marriage vows. Didn't you?" He picked up the folder, straightened the papers with his usual precision, and walked away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew about my life. The next morning, I received a hand-delivered envelope marked Legal Service, Open Immediately. My hands shook as I tore it open, already knowing what I would find inside. The petition for dissolution of marriage was 23 pages long, typed in legal language that made my head spin. But certain phrases jumped out at me like physical blows. Irreconcilable differences, inappropriate conduct, best interests of the minor child. Attached to the petition was an evidence packet that took my breath away. Nathaniel hadn't just been keeping casual records. He had been building a comprehensive case with the thoroughness of a prosecutor. Every text message, every photo, every conversation had been documented, time-stamped, and organized into a narrative that painted me as an unfaithful wife and unstable mother. There were screenshots of messages between Tristan and me that I had forgotten existed, including one where I had complained about Nathaniel being emotionally unavailable, and another where I had jokingly called Tristan trouble with a winking emoji. Taken out of context, they looked like evidence of an ongoing affair. The photos from the party were damning. In them, I could see what everyone else had seen. A married woman grinding against a man who wasn't her husband, my hands on his chest, his hands on my hips, both of us clearly enjoying the intimacy. The timestamps showed the progression of the evening, how the dancing had become increasingly inappropriate as the night wore on. But the worst part was the character assessment. Nathaniel had documented every argument, every late night, every moment of tension in our household since the party. He had recorded conversations where I blamed him for my behavior, where I justified my actions, where I had called him paranoid and controlling for wanting to understand what had happened. He had even included statements from witnesses. Martha had provided a written account of the dinner where I had publicly humiliated the family. Jennifer from accounting had submitted photos and videos from the party. Even Colin, my own brother-in-law, had given a statement about my concerning behavior and attitude. The custody section was the most devastating. Nathaniel was requesting primary physical custody of Olivia, with me getting supervised visitation until I completed counseling for impulse control and accountability issues. He had documented every time Olivia had seemed upset or confused by the tension in our house, every nightmare, every question about whether her parents were getting divorced. I called Sophie, sobbing, into the phone. "He's trying to take Olivia away from me." "What? That's impossible. You're her mother." "He has evidence, Sophie. Photos, messages, witness statements. He's been planning this for weeks." "What kind of evidence?" I read her some of the highlights, my voice breaking as I recounted the systematic way my husband had documented the destruction of our marriage. "Oh, Evadne," Sophie said softly. "This is bad." "I know it's bad. I need a lawyer. I need to fight this." "Do you have money for a lawyer?" I thought about our joint accounts, now controlled entirely by Nathaniel, about our savings, our investments, our financial assets that he had been organizing for weeks. "I don't know. He changed all the passwords to our accounts. He's been controlling the money." "That's financial abuse. A lawyer can help you with that." But even as Sophie tried to reassure me, I could hear the doubt in her voice. She had seen me at that dinner, heard me publicly humiliate my husband, and then blame him for my behavior. She loved me, but she wasn't blind. I spent the next 3 days trying to find a lawyer who would take my case. The first attorney I consulted, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, reviewed Nathaniel's evidence packet with growing concern. "Mrs. March, I have to be honest with you. This is a very thorough case your husband has built. The evidence of inappropriate conduct is clear, and your public statements about the incident show a lack of accountability that won't play well in court." But I was honest. I told him everything. "You told him everything after being caught, and then you blamed him for your behavior. That's not accountability, that's deflection." "So what are my options?" "Limited. You could fight the custody arrangement, but given the evidence and witness statements, you're unlikely to win primary custody. Your best bet might be to negotiate a fair visitation schedule and focus on completing the counseling requirements to get your supervised visitation lifted." Supervised visitation, I'm her mother. And mothers who engage in inappropriate public behavior while blaming their husbands for their choices sometimes need supervision until they can demonstrate stability. The reality of my situation hit me like a sledgehammer. I wasn't the victim here. I wasn't the wronged wife fighting for her marriage. I was the defendant in a custody case, and the evidence against me was overwhelming. Over the next week, I tried desperately to build my own case. I reached out to Tristan, hoping he would provide a statement minimizing what had happened between us. His response was a brief email. "I think it's best if we don't discuss this further. I wish you the best with your situation." I contacted co-workers, friends, anyone who might provide character references. Most of them declined politely, not wanting to get involved in what was clearly a messy divorce. The few who agreed to help seemed uncomfortable, their statements lukewarm at best. Meanwhile, Nathaniel continued his methodical approach to dismantling our marriage. He had moved into the guest room, maintaining a polite but distant relationship with me while being the perfect father to Olivia. He helped with her homework, made her favorite meals, read her bedtime stories, all while documenting my increasing emotional instability because I was becoming unstable. The stress of the legal proceedings, the realization that I was going to lose my daughter, the complete collapse of everything I had thought was true about my life, it was all taking its toll. I snapped at Olivia over minor things. I cried in the grocery store. I called in sick to work because I couldn't face the whispers and stares. And Nathaniel documented all of it. 2 weeks after receiving the divorce papers, I found myself sitting across from him at a mediation session, our lawyers flanking us like opposing generals. The mediator, a patient woman in her 50s, reviewed the case file with the same clinical detachment that Nathaniel had shown throughout this entire process. "Mrs. March," she said, "your husband is requesting primary custody of your daughter with supervised visitation for you pending completion of counseling. He's also requesting the family home and primary control of joint assets, with support payments to you. Are you prepared to respond to these requests?" I looked at my lawyer, who nodded grimly. We had already discussed this. I had no realistic chance of winning a custody fight, not with the evidence Nathaniel had assembled. "I want joint custody," I said weakly. "Given the evidence of instability and poor judgment, that's not realistic," the mediator replied. "However, your husband has indicated he's willing to work toward joint custody if you complete the required counseling and demonstrate consistent stability over a 6-month period." I looked across the table at Nathaniel. This man, who had systematically destroyed my life with the same methodical precision he brought to organizing his desk drawers. He met my eyes calmly, without anger or hatred, just the cool assessment of someone who had solved a complex problem. "Why are you doing this to me?" I whispered. "I'm protecting our daughter," he said simply, "and I'm protecting myself from someone who thinks marriage is optional and accountability is someone else's responsibility." The mediation session lasted 4 hours. By the end, I had agreed to everything: supervised visitation, counseling requirements, a modest support payment, the guest room in what had been our house until I found my own place. As we gathered our papers to leave, Nathaniel spoke to me one final time. "Evadne, I want you to know that I hope you get the help you need. I hope you learn to take responsibility for your choices. And I hope someday you can be the mother Olivia deserves." "I am the mother she deserves," I said, but even I could hear how hollow the word sounded. "No," he said quietly. "The mother she deserves wouldn't have ground against another man at a party and then blamed her husband for it. The mother she deserves wouldn't have humiliated her family in public and called it honesty. The mother she deserves would have said, 'I made a terrible mistake. I take full responsibility, and I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust.' Instead, you spent weeks justifying, blaming, and manipulating." He gathered his papers with characteristic precision and stood to leave. "The mother she deserves would have fought for her marriage instead of fighting to be right. 6 months later, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, seeing my daughter every other weekend under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. I had completed the required counseling, where I slowly, painfully learned the difference between honesty and accountability, between explanation and justification. Nathaniel had remarried, a quiet, stable woman who worked as a librarian and treated Olivia with genuine affection. They lived in our old house, in the life I had thrown away for one night of feeling desired by a man who couldn't even be bothered to return my calls once the lawyers got involved. I finally understood what my husband had been trying to tell me all along. It wasn't about the dancing, it wasn't about Tristan's hands on my body, or the photos or the videos. It was about the fact that when confronted with my mistake, I had chosen to justify rather than apologize, to blame rather than accept responsibility, to fight for my reputation rather than fight for my marriage. I had lost everything, not because I had made a mistake, but because I had refused to own it. And Nathaniel, methodical and thorough as always, had simply documented that refusal until it became impossible to deny. The last page of the custody agreement was signed and dated, making it official. Petition for dissolution, custody to petitioner pending review. My husband had won, not with anger or revenge, but with facts and patience, and the careful documentation of my own choices.